The bells of Marlow Hall Chapel echoed through the countryside, casting a haunting melody over the misty English morning. Guests in tailored suits and designer dresses filled the marble aisle, their chatter subdued beneath the chapel's high arches. It was meant to be the happiest day of Charlotte Wren's life. And in everyone's eyes, it was. She stood before the grand mirror in the bridal suite, her ivory silk gown hugging her frame like a second skin. Her hair was swept into an elegant chignon, lips painted in a delicate rose shade. She looked the part of the perfect bride. But behind her calm eyes was a storm she'd rehearsed for years. The day had finally come. The moment she would destroy the man who ruined her family. Charlotte adjusted the bracelet on her wrist, the only heirloom her mother had left her. It was a small, cracked sapphire encased in silver. It looked modest compared to the diamond she'd soon wear, but it burned like truth against her skin. There was a soft knock. The door creaked open and Clara, her maid of honor, peeked in. 10 minutes. Charlie. Ready to meet your forever. Charlotte smiled with mechanical grace. More than ready. As Clara stepped away, Charlotte's fingers trembled. Her heart wasn't racing from nerves. It was preparation. Precision. After all, a performance this delicate could not afford a mistake. Henry Blackwell, the groom, waited at the altar. Tall, composed, and every inch the heir to the Blackwell empire. He smiled like a man who had everything. But Charlotte saw past the expensive suit and regal posture. She saw the son of the man who had orchestrated her father's downfall. The congregation rose. The organist began to play. Charlotte took a deep breath and stepped into the aisle. Every eye turned to her. Cameras clicked. Whispers stirred. But her gaze fixed solely on Henry. He smiled. She smiled back. Step by step, she approached her prey. The vicar began his welcome, voice echoing through the chapel. Words about love and unity, about forever and fate. But as the vows neared, Charlotte noticed something. Henry's smile was too still. His eyes locked onto hers not with warmth, but with scrutiny. And then, as if summoned from her nightmares, he leaned forward and whispered, "I know who you are, Lottie." Her blood turned cold. The name Lottie hadn't been spoken in over a decade. Not since her father's arrest. Not since her identity was buried, changed, reinvented. Charlotte blinked, unable to move. The vicar's voice droned on behind her. Time slowed. Henry leaned back into position, lips still curled in that charming deceptive grin. She swallowed hard. The performance had begun. But now, it seemed, she wasn't the only actor on stage. Charlotte sat motionless, the vicar's words melting into a blur of ceremonial script. Around her, the congregation watched in admiration, unaware of the firestorm swirling just beneath the surface. She tried to gather her breath, but Henry's whisper still rang in her ears. "I know who you are, Lottie." She hadn't heard that name since the day her world crumbled. She had buried Lottie Wren years ago, along with the ashes of her childhood, her family, and every piece of innocence she once held dear. Henry had never once hinted he knew her past. Their courtship had been effortless. He played the attentive partner. He took her to operas, sponsored her writing retreats, made her feel seen. Or so she thought. Now she understood. She hadn't been in control. She had been watched. Studied. Used. The vicar cleared his throat. "Do you, Henry Blackwell, take Charlotte Wren to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Charlotte's eyes darted to Henry. His expression was serene, his smile professional. Only she could sense the tension behind his poised facade, as if he were daring her to stop the ceremony. But she couldn't. Not yet. She forced her fingers to relax as she clutched the bouquet. "I do," Henry answered smoothly. The vicar turned to her. "And do you, Charlotte Wren?" Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the chapel. A flash from the back doors. The crowd gasped. The heavy oak doors burst open. A man strode in, coat wet from rain, shoes echoing against the stone. He walked with purpose. A stranger to most, but not to Charlotte. It was Daniel Avery, her father's former solicitor. He hadn't been seen publicly in over a decade. Charlotte froze. Henry's jaw clenched, just enough for her to notice. Daniel stopped halfway down the aisle, eyes locked on the altar. Then he spoke. Loud. Clear. "This ceremony cannot continue. The bride is in danger." A murmur broke out among the guests. The vicar stumbled over his words. Henry turned fully, his face thunderous. "Leave. Now." But Daniel didn't budge. Instead, he pulled out a sealed envelope. "Miss Wren, this is for you." From someone who wanted the truth revealed before it was too late. Charlotte stepped forward, hands trembling. She took the envelope. The weight of it was heavier than she expected. Her eyes met Daniel's. He whispered. "He isn't who he says he is." Henry lunged forward, but Charlotte moved first. She ripped the seal. Inside were photographs. Dozens of them. Henry. With men in dark suits. Secret meetings. Off-the-record transactions. The same names that once destroyed her father's firm. Documents signed with forged dates. Confidential agreements. And worst of all, her own name, circled in red, dated long before they'd ever met. Her throat closed. Henry had targeted her. Charlotte turned to him, voice quiet and sharp. "So you knew all along. You planned it." Henry's voice was a whisper, meant only for her. "I wasn't the only one playing a game, was I?" Before she could respond, security staff rushed in to escort Daniel out. Guests stood in confusion. The chapel erupted into noise. But Charlotte didn't move. Her entire plan had just been turned on its head. She had come to trap a monster. And discovered he had seen her coming all along. The reception was never meant to happen. But guests had already begun filing into the manor's ballroom, unaware of the storm unraveling in the chapel. Charlotte remained behind in the vestry, her veil removed, her fingers curled tightly around the edges of the envelope. Henry hadn't followed her, yet. She knew he wouldn't cause a scene so soon. Not when eyes were still watching. But the moment those eyes turned away, she would no longer be safe. She reached for her phone. No signal. Of course not. The estate was remote, surrounded by woodlands, and Henry had ensured the security team was made up of his people. She had underestimated him. The knock came, gentle yet precise. Charlotte turned, bracing herself. It wasn't Henry. It was Eleanor, Henry's sister. A woman of subtlety and silence, Eleanor rarely spoke unless necessary. Today, her presence was unusually urgent. Eleanor stepped in, shut the door quietly behind her, then spoke in a hushed voice. "You can't stay here." Charlotte blinked. "You know." Eleanor gave a tight nod. "Not everything. But enough." She crossed the room and opened her handbag. From inside, she pulled a worn leather notebook and handed it to Charlotte. "My mother kept this. Before she died, she told me to give it to the woman Henry chose to marry." Charlotte hesitated, then opened it. Inside were pages of careful handwriting. Letters. Notes. Warnings. About Henry's childhood. About obsessions. About women who came too close to secrets. "He's done this before?" Charlotte whispered. Eleanor nodded. They always vanished quietly. No charges. No questions. But my mother, she knew. And she was terrified. Charlotte swallowed hard. "Then why didn't you stop him?" "I tried. But Henry is persuasive. He makes people feel mad when they speak out. He can ruin someone's life in a whisper." Charlotte's grip on the notebook tightened. Eleanor's voice dropped to a whisper. "He doesn't love you. He studied you. You're not a wife. You're a threat he planned to control." Charlotte's spine stiffened. "He won't control me." Eleanor gave her a key. "This opens the library at the back of the estate. There's a drawer behind the fireplace. You'll find more." Charlotte tucked the notebook under her arm, her mind racing. As Eleanor left, she paused at the door. "Be careful, Charlotte. Henry sees everything. And now, he knows you see him too." The moment she left, Charlotte slipped out the back. Rain drizzled from the gray skies. The manor loomed before her, beautiful and menacing. She moved quickly, clutching her skirts to avoid the mud. Inside the library, she found the fireplace exactly where Eleanor said. The drawer was hidden behind a sliding panel. Inside, passports, confidential files, photos of her, her friends, her family. One photograph chilled her, her childhood home, taken just weeks before it mysteriously burned. Tears welled in her eyes. Everything had been orchestrated. Every choice she thought was hers wasn't. She heard the door creak. Henry. His voice drifted through the room like a razor wrapped in silk. Darling. You've found my secrets, haven't you? Charlotte turned to face him. She no longer felt fear. Only rage. Charlotte didn't flinch. Henry stood at the doorway of the library, immaculate in his wedding suit, as though the world hadn't just unraveled around them. His expression was unreadable, calm, even charming, yet his eyes gleamed with something colder. Curiosity is a dangerous habit, my love, he said softly, stepping into the room. Especially when it leads you into places meant to stay closed. Charlotte carefully slid the drawer shut. She turned to face him fully, spine straight, jaw tight. You never loved me, she said. Henry tilted his head. That's not true. I chose you. Doesn't that mean anything? You chose me because you thought I was weak, she spat. You studied my life like it was a business portfolio. You manipulated every step. He smiled, slow and sinister. And you walked every one of them, didn't you? Charlotte's breath caught in her throat. Henry's hand moved to the mantelpiece, fingers tapping in rhythm. Tell me, what exactly have you discovered? Enough to run? Or enough to try to fight me? I'm not afraid of you anymore, she said. You should be. Before she could respond, the door creaked again. Eleanor returned, this time not alone. A man entered behind her. Tall, severe, in a pressed gray suit. Detective Inspector Monroe, Eleanor said. He's been following Henry's financial activities for over a year. Henry's smirk wavered. You brought the police to our wedding? Monroe stepped forward, eyes sharp. Technically, the wedding never happened. And this isn't about romance. It's about fraud, coercion, and possibly disappearance. Henry barked a laugh. You have no proof. Charlotte spoke up. Actually, I think you're about to give it to us. She pulled out her phone. From her dress's inner pocket, a slim device blinked silently. A recording? Henry sneered. No court will admit. Ah, but that's not the only copy, Eleanor said, stepping beside Charlotte. And this manor? Already under surveillance. Henry's face changed. The arrogance slipped, and for the first time, he looked uncertain. Monroe moved closer. We've already frozen your accounts. But there's something else you should know. From his folder, Monroe removed a photo. He placed it on the table. Charlotte looked down and gasped. It was the same photograph from the drawer. Her childhood home. But there was a timestamp now. And a shadow in the corner. Henry. He had been there. Before the fire. Charlotte's knees weakened slightly. Henry's expression darkened. You think I burned down a house to get your attention? Monroe replied coldly. No. I think you did it to remove evidence. And now we'll find out what that was. Suddenly, Henry lunged, not at Charlotte, but at the drawer behind her. Monroe moved fast, slamming him into the bookshelves. Chaos erupted. Books fell. The fireplace groaned. Charlotte stumbled back, heart thudding, as Eleanor pulled her away. Monroe cuffed Henry, reading his rights aloud as Henry growled threats through clenched teeth. Charlotte watched in silence. It was over. Or so she thought. Because as Henry was dragged from the room, he turned his head over his shoulder and said, cold and deliberate, this doesn't end here. You were never the victim, Charlotte. You were the reason. His words lingered like smoke. And Charlotte knew. This was far from finished. Charlotte sat alone in the drawing room of the estate, the silence broken only by the faint ticking of an old grandfather clock. The weight of Henry's final words pressed heavily on her chest. You were the reason. What did he mean? Was it just another manipulation tactic? One final twist to unsettle her? Eleanor entered quietly, holding 2 mugs of tea. She placed one beside Charlotte and sat opposite her. He's been taken to a secure facility, Eleanor said. The investigators will continue questioning him, but you're safe for now. Charlotte nodded, staring into the swirling steam of her drink. I thought it would feel like closure. It rarely does. There was a long pause. Then Charlotte whispered. He was there before the fire. Before everything fell apart. I was just a girl. My father had just closed a deal that week. Something big. Eleanor leaned in. Do you think the fire was a warning? Or retaliation? Charlotte shook her head slowly. I think it was a message. But I never understood it. She reached into her coat and retrieved the photo Monroe had left with her. This time, she noticed something she hadn't before. The date on the back wasn't the day of the fire. It was the day before. There was writing beneath the photo. Smudged, faint. Just one line. Payment secured. Target confirmed. Charlotte's breath hitched. This wasn't about love. It wasn't even just about her father's wealth. She had been selected. And worse, someone had paid for her. A knock at the door broke her thoughts. Monroe stepped in. His expression unreadable. We found something, he said. Charlotte stood immediately. What is it? He handed her a sealed envelope. Inside was a letter, typewritten, and signed. The same stationery from the hidden drawer. It read, if you're reading this, then he failed. But make no mistake. Others remain. He was never working alone. Charlotte's blood ran cold. Monroe continued, there were coded transfers in Henry's accounts. Shell companies. Offshores. He was receiving large deposits every month from a firm based in Dubai. Registered to a fake name. Do you think it was someone in my father's circle? She asked. Monroe nodded gravely. It's likely. We believe this was part of a larger operation. Targeting heirs, estates, companies. Henry was just one of the hands pulling strings. Eleanor stood. So what happens now? Monroe looked at Charlotte. That depends on her. She can let us handle the investigation quietly. Or she can go public. Shine a light on the entire thing. Charlotte didn't speak for a moment. Then she stood, walking to the window. The garden was dark, shadows stretching long in the moonlight. No, she said. No more hiding. No more fear. I want the world to know what he tried to do. What they are still doing. Monroe nodded. But as he turned to leave, he paused. There's one more thing, he said. We traced a call from the manor 2 nights before the wedding. It was made to an unknown number. And it was short. Just one sentence. Charlotte turned. Monroe pulled out his notes and read. The replacement is ready. She suspects nothing. Silence fell. Charlotte's heart dropped. Replacement? She was the replacement? But for who? Or for what? Charlotte couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, that phrase echoed. The replacement is ready. She suspects nothing. She wasn't just a target. She was a substitute. But who had she replaced? The next morning, Eleanor found her hunched over documents in the library, surrounded by files Monroe had left behind. One photo sat isolated from the rest, an image of Henry at a gala, arm in arm with a woman who wasn't Charlotte. The woman's face was half turned, but her posture. It was eerily familiar. Who is she? Charlotte asked. Eleanor leaned closer. I've never seen her before. Charlotte flipped the photo. No date. No name. Later, Monroe arrived with news. We found records of another engagement. Henry was betrothed before. 5 years ago. A woman named Annabelle Rutherford. Charlotte's mouth went dry. What happened to her? Monroe's eyes darkened. She vanished 2 weeks before their wedding. Declared missing. The case was never solved. Her parents claimed she ran off abroad, but there were inconsistencies. He handed her a report, missing person documents, newspaper clippings, police notes. Everything felt familiar. Same venue. Same planner. Same ring design. Same pattern. Charlotte's voice trembled. He was going to marry her. Then she disappeared. And then I came along. Monroe nodded. You weren't the first. And you might not have been the last. Why me? She whispered. He looked at her. Because you were next in line. The estate, your father's shares, the family trust, they would have passed to you upon marriage. You fit the profile. Charlotte sat back, the weight of it all sinking in. The fire, the hidden drawer, the manipulation, the secrecy. Henry hadn't just married for gain. He was repeating a cycle. And one of his brides had never walked away. Charlotte stood up. I want to see her family. Monroe looked surprised. Annabelle's? Yes. If she's still out there. I need to know. If not, then I need to know why. They traveled to Yorkshire, where Annabelle's parents lived in an old countryside manor. Mr. and Mrs. Rutherford were cautious at first. But once Charlotte explained who she was, and who Henry had become, they agreed to speak. Mrs. Rutherford trembled as she laid out an old scrapbook. Photos of Annabelle. Her smile so wide. A letter she had written days before her disappearance. She was so excited, Mrs. Rutherford said. Then she called us one evening, whispering. She said something was wrong. That she was being watched. And then? Charlotte asked. She vanished, Mr. Rutherford said bitterly. The police thought it was cold feet. We knew better. Charlotte flipped through the last page of the scrapbook. There, tucked in, was a torn piece of a diary. It read, I'm being replaced. He said I've served my purpose. Charlotte looked up slowly. Annabelle knew. She knew she wasn't just being abandoned. She was being replaced. The last line chilled her to the bone. If anything happens to me, find the girl with the scar behind her ear. He calls her the reserve. Charlotte's hand flew to the back of her ear. There, a faint scar, one she'd always had, from a childhood fall. Nothing special. Until now. Mrs. Rutherford gasped. It's you, she whispered. Charlotte couldn't breathe. Charlotte stood in the quiet hallway of the Rutherford manor, her fingers still brushing the faint scar behind her ear. She called me the reserve, she whispered. The realization settled like a storm in her chest. All this time, she hadn't been chosen because of love or fate. She had been a backup plan. A contingency. Annabelle had known she was being replaced. And now, 5 years later, Henry had simply pressed reset. Eleanor sat beside her in silence during the long drive home. When they arrived back at the Hawthorne estate, Charlotte felt the weight of the house itself. Its walls, once familiar, now seemed to whisper secrets. Monroe was waiting in the drawing room. We have something, he said, placing a laptop on the table. It was security footage, obtained from Henry's private study. A hidden camera Eleanor had placed days ago without Henry's knowledge. Charlotte leaned in. The footage showed Henry alone at his desk. He poured himself a drink and began speaking, though no one else was in the room. I almost admired Annabelle, he said softly, swirling the glass. She figured it out far too late. But Charlotte, she played her part better than I'd hoped. He laughed. Poor thing still believes she chose this marriage. Charlotte's hands curled into fists. Then he paused, eyes focused, as if remembering something bitter. It's always the same. A perfect wife, a powerful name, a legal link to the money. And if things get messy, he shrugged. Well, fires happen. Accidents. People forget. Eleanor pressed pause. Charlotte could barely speak. He's done this before. And he would have done it again. Monroe nodded. We have enough to expose him. But if we move too soon, he'll disappear. Charlotte's jaw tightened. Then we won't move yet. What are you thinking? Eleanor asked. Charlotte turned toward them both, her voice steady now. We're going to finish what Annabelle started. We'll give him the illusion of control. Let him feel safe. Monroe blinked. You want to bait him? Yes, she said. I'll be the bride he never saw coming. 2 days later, Henry returned from a business trip. The estate was silent when he entered, Charlotte waiting at the grand staircase like nothing had changed. You're early, she said with a soft smile. He looked surprised. Did you miss me? Terribly. Dinner was prepared. Wine was poured. Laughter echoed. Charlotte played her part, just as Henry expected. She wore the necklace he gave her, leaned in when he spoke, and listened to his fabricated stories. But as the evening wore on, she excused herself. Henry remained downstairs, swirling another glass of wine. Upstairs, in a hidden room, Eleanor and Monroe monitored everything through the audio link in her necklace. He's confessing with every sip, Monroe muttered. Charlotte returned shortly after, eyes locked with Henry's. He reached across the table. To us. She lifted her glass. To the end, she replied. The fire crackled. He didn't notice the camera tucked behind the bookshelf. Didn't notice Eleanor sneaking into his study while he boasted about legacy and manipulation. Didn't notice the documents being copied. He thought he was winning. But the bride he believed he controlled was now orchestrating his fall. And she wasn't finished. The ballroom was dressed in gold and silver. Guests arrived one by one, unaware of the storm brewing beneath their polished shoes. Tonight was Henry Rutherford's grand anniversary gala, celebrating his success, his marriage, and his power. Charlotte floated through the crowd like a vision in white and midnight blue, elegant and composed. She greeted old allies, smiled for photographs, and kept Henry close. To the outside world, they were a dream couple. Inside they were a powder keg. Eleanor and Monroe moved silently through the service corridors. Every camera, every microphone, was now live, streaming not only to their secure devices, but quietly sent to a select list of journalists, authorities, and victims' families. It was time. Henry raised his glass on the stage, his voice smooth and commanding. To legacy, he said. To loyalty. And to love. A chorus of cheers followed. Then Charlotte stepped forward. To truth, she said, clinking her glass against his. And to those who never got to speak it. Henry's smile faltered for the briefest second. She held her gaze on him. Would you like to say a few more words, darling? She asked. Henry nodded, clearing his throat. Of course. He began to speak, about heritage, resilience, and ambition. But then his own voice, recorded, cruel and calculating, began to play from the speakers above. I almost admired Annabelle. But Charlotte, she played her part better than I'd hoped. The crowd gasped. Faces turned. Henry's glass shattered on the floor. More recordings played. Mentions of manipulation, fire, inheritance, control. He spun around. What is this? Charlotte stepped forward, steady and fearless. This, Henry, is your final toast. Uniformed officers entered from the double doors. Henry tried to run, but Monroe blocked his path. Nowhere left to hide, mate, Monroe said calmly. Henry was handcuffed, dragged out of his own celebration. Silence swept the room. Then, applause. Some guests left. Others stayed, whispering. The legend of Henry Rutherford had ended, not with a whisper, but with his own words turned against him. Charlotte walked to the open balcony, the wind tugging at her gown. Eleanor joined her. You did it. No, Charlotte replied. We did. The stars above Brighton gleamed like embers in the dark. She had been the second choice. The forgotten bride. The pawn. But in the end, she rewrote the ending. Not just for herself, but for every woman who had been silenced. The vow she never took had saved her life.